Vladimir Putin is not joking about using nukes. The world has not been this close to nuclear Armageddon since the Cuban Missile Crisis more than half a century ago. That is the quite startling warning from President Biden as Putin's brutal invasion of Ukraine appears to be falling apart. Ukrainian forces have been steamrolling Russian troops. Ukrainian counteroffensives are recapturing territory at lightning speed, liberating their own lands and forcing the Russian invaders to retreat. Russia's recent setbacks have been humiliating, but President Biden cautions that could be dangerous. He says if things continue down the path we're on right now, we could have a direct threat of Putin launching nukes. At a fundraiser last night, President Biden said, "I'm trying to figure out what is Putin's off-ramp. Where does he find a way out? Where does he find himself in a position that he doesn't not only lose face, but lose significant power within Russia?" President Biden said of Putin, "We've got a guy I know fairly well. He's not joking when he talks about potential use of tactical nuclear weapons because his military is, you might say, significantly underperforming." Russia's failing invasion is facing mounting and unprecedented criticism at home, and there's apparently turmoil within Putin's inner circle. It's getting so bad that the Washington Post reports a member of Putin's inner circle confronted Putin over his handling of the war. The disagreement so significant that it was included in President Biden's daily intelligence briefing, according to the Post. There may have also been public and embarrassing rebukes. One of Putin's puppets in Ukraine, a deputy governor of a Russian-occupied region, said Russia's defense minister should shoot and kill himself over his failures. And a top Russian lawmaker is lashing out and demanding that the military stop lying about the dire situation in Ukraine. The infamous Chechen warlord known as Putin's attack dog went on a social media tirade against Russia's military leadership. Ramzan Karadovic calling for Putin to launch nuclear strikes against Ukraine to turn the tide. Putin has now promoted him to the rank of general. Putin's mobilization of civilians to fight in the war has been a disaster, with reports of new recruits killing themselves and others calling a Ukrainian hotline to surrender. According to neighboring states, hundreds of thousands of young Russian men have fled Russia to avoid being drafted. Today, the White House made it clear that the United States has not seen any new intelligence to indicate there is an imminent threat of Russia using nukes. Let's bring in Michael Weiss, Yahoo News senior correspondent and author of a forthcoming history of Russian intelligence. Michael, you co-authored this article this week. Putin is losing the war in all 4 Ukrainian regions he annexed. At this point, do you see any way in which Putin can win this thing?
Conventionally, no, I don't. I just got back from Tallinn, Estonia, where I interviewed the outgoing head of their foreign intelligence service, and I asked him point blank, what do you see as the outcome of this war? And he, without hesitating, said Ukraine will win. I also asked him, by the way, what is the likelihood of Putin deploying a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine? And he paused and gave a kind of a response with a knowing calm, you might say. He said, look, NATO has superb intelligence on Russia's strategic and nuclear capabilities. We monitor these things round the clock. There's a response plan or plan of action in place should we detect any kind of untoward activity in that regard. And finally, should Putin decide to do something really stupid, such as use WMD, he's going to alienate his last 2 major power friends, which are China and India. So I took that as a sort of note of reassurance. Now, that's not to say that, President Biden is speaking out of turn. I might quibble with we're at the Cuban Missile Crisis again. I mean, we don't have nuclear weapons aimed at the United States 100 miles off the coast of the country. But, I understand why he's saying it. He wants people to be on guard. But as you pointed out, Shep, U.S. intelligence has not detected anything that suggests that Putin is even preparing for such a contingency. So I think we need to be a little bit calmer and not get panicked here.
Well, everyone I hear from, you included tonight, is very calm. Everyone except the president, who's using this particular rhetoric. And you say, well, but we need to be on guard. We need to be on guard from what? I mean, I really just don't understand what it was about last night and what was different last night than the day before or the day before that.
Yeah, I mean, look, Putin has alluded to the possible use of nuclear weapons repeatedly throughout his career. Recall that he did this on the eve of the invasion of Ukraine, and he did it most recently when he heralded the so-called annexation of 4 oblasts in Ukraine, which, as you mentioned, he's actually losing ground in. So I think the way I see this as somebody who has looked at Kremlinology and studied the Russian intelligence services quite intimately, he understands that in the West, this is the one card he has to play that can terrorize us all. I mean, he's doing it right now. You and I are sitting here on national television talking about could he launch a nuclear weapon. So he's not stupid. He knows that this is something that's going to engender a response. And I think, frankly, I mean, I've seen former U.S. intelligence officials criticize President Biden for that remark. And again, it was at a fundraiser, so maybe take that with a pinch of salt. But they're saying, you know, this is not the way to kind of respond to Putin's provocations. The U.S. has made it very clear that our policy is to increase security assistance to help Ukraine win the war. You're also seeing now, frankly, the same day as we're talking about nuclear Armageddon, the Daily Telegraph in the UK quoting U.S. senior military officials saying, actually, and quite unexpectedly, the peninsula of Crimea, which Russia seized and annexed illegally in 2014, is now in play. In other words, the Ukrainians are doing so well on the battlefield, they might actually recapture territory that they lost 8 or 9 years ago. So I think Putin is desperate. He, as you mentioned, people are the knives out there are knives out for him in Moscow. His defense secretary Sergei Shoigu is in particular a target from not just Ramzan Kadyrov, the warlord, but also Yevgeny Prigozhin, who's the financier of the Wagner mercenary group.
Michael Weiss from Yahoo News. Michael, as always, thank you.